this is my review of Assassination Classroom. Okay, so this episode showcases the end of the final exam arc, but it also showcases the lengths that Principal Asano will actually go to actually secure his methodology as a valid way of the way forward for his teaching philosophy and his way to actually enforce that on other people. So this episode was ultimately him going to the logical extreme with that. So it starts off with them on the final problem of the exam. As it turns out, as Nagisa explains, a lot of people were actually wiped out as a result of the exam being just that hard. With only 2 people being able to actually make it to the end and getting the full credit for it. With the possibility of having actual time for it, being Karma and Gakushu Asano. So as Karma is getting ready to actually solve the problem, he begins to think back about something that Nagisa said earlier to him about whether or not, when he begins to believe that whether or not he could do it and actually solve it. And remembers that at some point Nagisa remarked that he's kind of a genius, and remarked that a lot of people may struggle to keep up with him. And Karma merely remarks that if only it were that simple, pointing out that everybody has hidden talents and that sometimes they just kind of manifest themselves in different ways, and it's unclear what talent he actually has and whether or not he can actually use that talents for himself, but decides that he doesn't really have time to actually reminisce about that kind of stuff and proceeds to solve the problem. At which point we see the 2 different ideas behind how each of these 2 students actually go about solving the problem. So the problem itself is to try and find the volume for the middle of a cube, and it's a very kind of complicated problem, and there are 2, and each student adopts a different idea on how to actually solve it. Gakushu's is a bit more complicated, pointing out that he just needs to isolate the area within to actually make it his own domain and try and solve it from the inside out by just isolating the corners and then creating a big dodecahedron style shape like in the center of it, just making it overly complicated than it needs to be. And as he's doing that, and as he's also shooting out all the different enemies that are in the corner, because that's the visual they decided to go with this, he remarks that he will take down his father, and finally uses this as a perfect example to point out how he plans to use this to become a better educator and lead people going forward, and how he plans to do this at counter at odds with his father's philosophy, pointing out that all his philosophy does is burn people out and doesn't actually help them actually solve any actual problems and apply any applicable skills, and that he plans to actually showcase that philosophy is flawed by basically beating his father at his own game. So meanwhile, Karma's is a little bit more simplified and a little bit more poetic, as he eventually realizes that it's actually not as simple, not as complicated as he thinks it is, and that in actuality he's actually been not really looking out that it's his own domain, but rather that it's a bunch of different domains that are all cornered onto each other and are all identical. And from that, he's able to realize that they're all in the same boat, and that there's stuff special about him that he doesn't realize, and that everybody else has something special to him, because he's an outsider looking in. But if he looks at it like everybody is the same, everybody's the same, and is identical, and all have a hidden talent, then he can realize that he has a hidden talent as well. And eventually he does come to the conclusion that the inside is literally just a spear, and then he uses that to solve for half of it, and which is how he's able to actually get the actual correct solution. So it showcases both of their test scores. Karma actually beats out Gakushu Asano. Karma got full marks, whereas Gakushu didn't, because he ran out of time. So because of that, Karma was actually able to surpass Gakushu for first. At which point they proceed to go to the next day, or however long it's been since. At which point Korosensei decides to post the results on the blackboard, pointing out that the main campus is likely doing that as well, and he has the opportunity to do so. So he figures, why the hell not? And then he places a giant poster board on the blackboard that showcases all the scores for the top 50. And eventually Torasaka realizes that he got 46th, and everybody realizes that Torasaka was at the bottom of their group, and that he didn't do, and that if he only placed in 46th, then that means that everybody else placed above him, which means that every single member of Class E placed in the top 50. So everybody then begins to celebrate because they realize that they finally earned their entry back into the main campus, and are understandably pretty excited about that. They can now go into the high school of their dreams. They can now graduate from E-class if they want to. And now basically everybody is just able to celebrate and point out that it feels very finale-ish, but not really. So yeah, this isn't the last episode, not by a long shot, but this episode this part is basically just, hey, we finally did it. We finally won against the main campus. We can now finally move back in if we want to. And truth be told, that's actually a pretty empowering thing, because now everybody can go back into the main campus. They can finally graduate on the main campus and go on to go to the high schools of their dreams and actually pursue all the different careers that they want. So yeah, that's a pretty big goal for them, and that hurdle has finally been dissolved, because now they've finally proven that they can actually do well at their academics and actually get back on the main campus. Meanwhile, Class A and the rest, and by extension the rest of the main campus, although specifically Class A, since that's the group we actually see, Class A is a little less enthused about how they did, because, well, truth be told, a lot of their best students actually got beat out of the top spot. The Big Five actually got beaten out, and as we've established, Gakushu didn't place in first for the first time ever. So yeah, everybody's a little bit understandably miffed, and Ryo Nakamura actually points it out to the fact that their bloodlust was actually nurtured way too late, pointing out that bloodlust can only take you so far, and cramming isn't really the way to do it, and that it has to be a slow and steady build-up, or otherwise you're going to crash and burn. And sure enough, everybody did crash and burn in Class A, because they relied too much on Principal Asano's methodology to actually steer them through, and then they wound up being burnt out at the very end because they didn't have any energy left to spare once the test came to a close. So, in short, everybody just got worn out, and they weren't actually able to succeed. So, and when the rest of the Big Five asked where they went wrong and how they actually failed, Gakushu just kind of tells them all straight that the reason that they failed was because their philosophy. Because the philosophy that the entire school is built on failed them. That they didn't do well because the teaching philosophy that his father has been preaching up to this point is flawed, and pointing out that even he didn't do so well this time around, but that he plans to actually build up his top rank again, and then he plans to actually succeed at making a new path for the rest of the Class A moving forward if they'll let him. At which point Principal Asano walks in the room, pointing out the flaw in that statement, pointing out that Gakushu actually shouldn't be bragging so much because he's actually not the top student anymore, and that Class C has actually placed the top student, and that because of that he's been actually teaching for the unknown. Principal Asano merely points out that because his teaching philosophy is designed to prepare students for the harsh reality of life, and that sometimes people don't do very well, and that they need to course correct for it, and that the reason he's discriminating against Class E is because they're designed to basically be like, hey, you want to actually do well, then this is punishment for what happens if you don't. So he points out that that's the reason why he's built his philosophy, because he wants the rest of his students to be strong so that they can continue to take whatever life throws at them. However, Class A points out that that's not so simple, and even the Big Five bowed to the principal, pointing out that clearly there are some things that Class E is able to teach them that Class A and the rest of the main campus was not, and point out that with all due respect, they would like to be transferred to E class to actually learn some of their methods, which causes Principal Asano to kind of freak out a little bit, at least internally. And when Gakushu merely asks what he thinks about it, Gaku Asano just strikes his son across the face and sends him flying across the room, with his friends gathering him up and taking him to the nurse. But as he's leaving, he's leaving, Gakushu merely remarks that he finally sees what kind of person Gakuho is when his back is against the corner, his back into the corner. So, and then he proceeds to go to the nurse, and Gakuho Asano is left reeling from this and thinking, how can he actually reinforce his philosophy as a teacher? So at which point he comes back to the class 3E's campus, and they begin to remark about how they're not actually going to be transferring out of E class because they still need to actually kill Korosensei before graduation, and that there's still some things that they can learn at class E that they can't learn elsewhere, and that they plan to continue onward until the end of the school year, where either the mission comes to a close or they actually succeed in killing Korosensei. And Korosensei is proud of them for sticking to their guns, and then proceeds to start to divulge his biggest weakness so that they can actually win and finally succeed in defeating him. Only for a giant loud noise to suddenly echo across the campus, and suddenly the building starts to shake. At which point everybody proceeds to poke their head out the window, and they see Gakuho Asano there with some massive construction equipment, and is proceeding to try and tear the building down, and has already started to do so with the students inside. At which point Gakuho Asano remarks what his plan is. He's basically going to evacuate them, pointing out that that the school board, which has actually decided to demolish the building, which we know is crap because it's clear that it was actually his entire decision, because he is the school board. He runs the place. He founded the school. He has complete and utter control over the entire thing. He's the chairman of the Board of Education and the principal, which is why I refer to him as Chairman Asano for a little bit early in the review series, because he's effectively the judge, jury, and executioner in Kunigayaka Junior High. He controls everything, so naturally it makes sense that he would show up with construction equipment and have complete say over whether or not something gets demolished. And when asked why he's doing that, he immediately remarks that he's actually going to be building a new satellite campus instead. That is going to be, as he describes it, more akin to that of a prison. It's going to have high-tech security. It's going to be inescapable, and basically he's just going to boot everybody to that remote campus so that he doesn't have to see Class 3E anymore, and he can continue to enforce his philosophy. At which point Korosensei intervenes and points out that Asano's philosophy, desire to prove his philosophy right knows no bounds, and Asano merely points out that he only seeks to do what he feels is best for the school, and then proceeds to remark that he's going to actually terminate Korosensei. And when Korosensei freaks out because he believes he's going to be fired, Principal Asano merely remarks that he actually meant that literally, and he's actually going to kill Korosensei. At which point he decides to engage Korosensei in a little wager and actually calls off the destruction of the school for a bit, so that he can actually set up the puzzle against Korosensei. As it turns out, he sets up this entire thing where he sets up 5 different workbooks, each with different problems in them, and then he points out that he has actually set up 4 grenades with anti-sensei BBs, and 1 that's fatal to humans, and that 4 of the 5 are going to be solved by Korosensei, while the 1 is going to be set up and solved by Asano. So basically, long story short, is that Asano plans to actually eliminate Korosensei by forcing him to solve math problems, and if Korosensei is fast enough, the grenade won't actually go off and hurt him. So, and then he also asks Torasuga to run the math, which Torasuga is less than infused at doing. But then Torasuga does it and points out that it's actually a 20% chance of them actually being fatal, but also points out that the game is entirely rigged in Asano's favor, because in addition to Korosensei being forced to solve 4 of the 5, Asano can really just back out and leave whenever he wants, since he doesn't necessarily have to solve the 5th problem. He can just leave if he wants to. But in any case, Korosensei decides that he actually does want to actually partake in the challenge, and proceeds to open the first word book, which he can't solve very quickly because, as we've established earlier, way long ago, and which Asano is using to his advantage here. Korosensei doesn't do well with puzzles, and basically this entire scenario is just one large puzzle. So, case in point, he opens the first word book, he isn't able to solve it in time, and then gets blown up before he can regenerate and actually get out of the way. Because that's actually another caveat, that the person who's solving the problems isn't allowed to move. So, yeah, Asano is basically just making Korosensei sit in front of a bomb until he dies. So, yeah, that's very dangerous. But Asano merely remarks that that Korosensei needs to continue going and prove that his methodology is correct. So, yeah, long story short, this episode just kind of sets up that Asano is that desperate to actually prove that his philosophy is correct, that he's willing to blow up Korosensei because he can, and is even using underhanded tactics to actually do so. Basically, as Kurasama describes him, he's an assassin. He's trying to teach the philosophy of strength to his students, and the best way to do that is to actually kill the teacher that's been causing him problems up to this point. So, yeah. Basically, he's trying to assassinate Korosensei so that he can actually succeed and actually beat Korosensei at his own game and finally win. So that and long story short, he's trying to just prove that he's right, and he's doing everything in his power to prove that he's right, even though it's clear from this point that he's wrong. So, yeah, that's how this episode ends with Korosensei being blown up by a grenade. And he still has 3 other grenades to go through before he actually can bow out of the challenge. So, yeah, and Korosensei is also badly injured and isn't allowed to regenerate before he actually solves it. So, that's gonna beg the question of whether or not Korosensei is actually going to be able to survive Asano's little game. But I am assuming he will, because there's actually several episodes left. But hey, but in any case, yeah. That's my review of Assassination Classroom. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Facebook and Twitter in the description below. And also, be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It really helps me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks, and I'm always saying thanks. So be sure to check those out in the description below as well. Also, if you want to see more videos from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked on the end screen. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me and what YouTube thinks you will like based on that. So, if you want to see something new or something that you may or may not like, then be sure to check both of those out. But, regardless of whether or not you do any or all of those things, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!